Today we will explore the strategic dynamics between the big blind and the button in 3-bet pots during 100 big blind deep 6-max poker games. Let's first look at pre-flop strategy before moving on to post-flop. The button typically initiates the play by opening with approximately 44% of hands upon the small blind folding, the big blind being the last to defend the pot and with no subsequent players can afford to call more broadly, benefiting from favourable pot odds and no risk of a squeeze play. The big blind's 3-bet range is polarised, typically opting for a larger size than the small blind, usually between 11 to 14 big blinds. The value component of this range includes pairs from pocket nines to aces and large Broadway hands like king-queen suited, ace-jack suited, and ace-queen offsuit. Bluffs and semi-bluffs incorporate hands such as suited connectors like 10-9 suited, suited aces like ace-5 suited, and offsuit hands like king-9 offsuit or jack-10 offsuit. In response to the big blind's 12-13 big blind 3-bet, the button predominantly defends by calling, but also occasionally 4-bets aggressively. The button's calling range includes most pocket pairs, all suited Broadway cards, larger offsuit Broadway hands, and most ace-x suited hands. For value, the button 4-bets with pocket jacks, 2 aces and ace-king, while bluffing with hands near the bottom of their continuing range, including weaker suited aces and offsuit Broadway hands. Now for post-flop, we can analyze all 1,755 possible flops, each combinatorically weighted in this database. The big blind shows an overall equity of 51.68% with an expected value, EV, of 12.78 big blinds out of 24.76 big blinds, which equates to 51.62% of the pot. These simulations include flop bet sizes for the big blind ranging from 10% to 75% of the pot. Flops with the highest EV include Queen Jack 10 flops, where Ace King, Queens, Jacks, and 10s significantly connect. Other high EV flops for the big blind are Rainbow King High and 10 High flops, particularly when accompanied by a low board pair, as this reduces the likelihood of the button having a set. Flops less favourable for the big blind, thus more advantageous for the button, are those with a pair of queens, monotone textures, and low connected flops with a flush draw. Ace-high flops generally favour the button due to their pre-flop range, rich in ace-x hands, and queen-high flops are advantageous due to the presence of ace-queen in their range. The big blind often opts for larger bet sizes, such as 75% of the pot, on 10-high, jack-high, and 9-high rainbow flops, where overpairs are present in their range but not in the buttons. Medium bet sizes, like 35% or 50%, are often employed on king-high boards, paired boards, and trips. Smaller bets, around 10 to 20% of the pot, are more common on monotone and many two-tone flops, used to deny equity with medium-strength hands. When the big blind checks, the button will check back approximately 48% of the time on average. On most flops, they bet into the big blind 40 to 60% of the time, usually with small sizes around 20 to 35% of the pot, aimed at denying equity from the missed pre-flop bluffs in the big blind's range. However, the big blind protects their checking range with strong hands for potential check raises. Overly aggressive betting from the button allows the big blind to extract more value with these check raises. On certain board textures, the button opts for larger bets, such as 50% or 75% of the pot. These larger sizes correlate with a more frequent checking back and a more polarized betting range. Example flops for larger bets include those where the value hands significantly outmatch the bluff catchers and where numerous draws struggle against the big bet size, like an ace-king-2 flop with a flush draw, which also has Broadway straight draws. When the big blind checks, the button will often bet small. In response to the button's smaller bets, the big blind check raises aggressively, about 20% of the time, on average against a 20% pot bet. On some flops, such as king high with 2 low cards or paired king flops with a low card, the big blind might check raise almost their entire range for a small size, like 25%. Slightly larger check raises are used on boards like low paired flops, e.g. 8, 8, 2, or low disconnected flops, e.g. 9, 5, 2. In this segment, we delve into a nuanced analysis of the flop play dynamics in a poker hand between the big blind and the button in 3-bet pots. First, we will be focusing on a 10 of spades, 7 of diamonds, 5 of spades flop. This board presents flush and straight draws. The big blind holds all over pairs, while the button rarely has jacks or higher. The big blind also has numerous top pair hands like ace-10 offsuit and king-10 off, while the button has fewer 10x hands due to the low likelihood of offsuit Broadway combinations calling preflop. Various bet sizes from 20% to 75% are employed on this flop. The larger 75% bet size is comprised of a mix of 24% over pairs and 18.9% top pair hands for clear value. A similar composition is observed with the 50% bet size, consisting of 17.9% over pairs and 20.4% top pairs. Hands like jacks or ace-10 benefit from inducing folds from overcard hands, as an overcard on the board significantly weakens these combinations on later streets, despite their current strength. As the bet size decreases, the proportion of overpairs in the range reduces, with more pocket pairs and middle pair combinations coming into play. For instance, in the 20% bet size, middle pairs make up 10.6% compared to just 3.46% in the larger 75% bet size. Looking at the turn report, after a small flop bet of 35% and a call, the big blind checks 53.54% of the time. The big blind is more inclined to check on flush completing cards as well as on ace and queen turns due to the high density of high flush draws and ace-queen in the flop calling range. On brick turns, the big blind tends to bet larger, using sizes like 75% or 50% of the pot with a polar range. For turns that favor the big blind, such as a king or a 7, the tendency is to bet frequently at around 50% of the pot. Smaller bet sizes, like 25%, are often utilized on ace or king turns with medium strength hands to extract value from weaker pairs and draws. If the big blind checks the turn, the button checks back around 49.62% of the time on average. This indicates a well-protected checking range, which includes some strong hands that are prepared for a check raise. Thus, the button must opt for smaller bet sizes, such as 25% or 50% of the pot, to minimize risks against potential check raises. The button checks back more often and opts for larger bet sizes on dry turn cards, like a deuce or a 5, where draw equity is lower. On dynamic turns, the button uses smaller bet sizes and bets more often to deny equity from the opponent. The 8 of diamonds turn brings additional straight draws and a second flush draw, while Jack-9 is a small part of both ranges. The numerous additional draws necessitate more equity denial. The big blind combats its range disadvantage by constructing an all-in range. This range uses strong hands that are vulnerable to being outdrawn, like pocket jacks or ace-10 for value, and bluffs like a flush draw or a straight draw with a pair. Ace-jack is a key bluff, holding significant equity against most draws and maintaining strong equity against pairs with 2 overcards and the straight draw. The big blind checks 66% of the time on this turn card. This well-protected checking range restrains the button from betting too frequently. When the button bets, it's mostly for smaller sizes, around 25%. Against these small bets, the big blind check raises all in 11.1% of the time with sets, 2 pairs, overpairs for value, and some top pair hands vulnerable to the button's bluffs. Our second example is ace of spades, 5 of spades, 5 of diamonds. On this board, both players have ranges that are polarized towards top pair, unmade hands, and pocket pairs in between, There's a high density of top pair hands in both ranges, which creates a dynamic where both players must exercise caution when betting top pairs for value against weaker pairs. The big blind holds ace king and ace queen, which dominate all the top pair holdings in the buttons range. Consequently, these hands can bet large for value. In this situation, the big blind bets ace king for a large size like 75% of the pot. The button responds by calling with all top pair hands, while being indifferent with weaker holdings. If the button calls the large flop bet and the turn is the 10 of spades, the big blind frequently bets around 80% of the time, including some all-in bets for 112% of the pot. The all-in range primarily comprises ace-king without a spade for value, supplemented by some flush draws with or without a pair as bluffs. The rest of the betting range, wagering around 50% of the pot, includes flushes, trips, and other top pairs like ace-king with a spade and ace-queen. These hands are less vulnerable to another spade on the river. On non-spade rivers, most of this value range will push all in for the remaining 31% of the pot. If the big blind checks the flop, which occurs 60.5% of the time, the button responds by betting 53.2% of the time with small bets intended to extract value from holdings weaker than top pair. The big blind check raises ace-king and ace-queen at a high frequency. If the big blind check calls the flop, donk bets on the turn primarily occur on an ace or a 5, which diminishes the value combinations in the button's flop betting range. After a big blind check on the turn, the button checks back 56.09% of the time on average, betting more frequently on spade or diamond turns and less so on Broadway cards. The button often uses 50% or 75% bet sizes, with the larger size more common on lower cards and the smaller size on higher cards and spade or diamond turns, allowing more frequent bets and greater equity denial from draws. In our last example, we will look at Queen of Spades, 9 of Spades, 5 of Diamonds. The flop is advantageous for the button primarily because their pre-flop range includes a wider array of hands that connect well with this board. They are likely to have more Queen X combinations, including Ace Queen, King Queen, and suited Broadway cards, which give them a good chance of hitting top pair. Additionally, the button's range includes suited hands and connectors that could have flopped flush and straight draws, further strengthening their position on this board. The big blind strategy on the flop, the big blind has a range of bet sizes from 20% to 75%. Larger bet sizes tend to be more polarized with a heavier concentration of hands like kings, aces, and ace queen. As the bet size decreases, the range becomes less polar, including weaker hands like jacks and tens. Bluffs include 5x, ace-high hands with backdoor flush draws and unmade straight and flush draws. With a 75% bet by the big blind, the button's typical response is to call and occasionally going all in with ace-queen. All top and middle pair hands continue, while other made hands are indifferent or will fold. Most draws continue, except for the weakest gut-shot straight draws. On a turn card like the 6 of clubs, the 8-7 straight completes, but it's not a significant part of either player's pre-flop range. Most ace-queens and kings shove for value as they are vulnerable. Aces, being less vulnerable, tend to bet 50% of the pot and shove on most rivers. Many strong hands check to protect missed draws that might check to see the river. The button often bets small, and the big blind check raises all in at a high frequency. Now let's look at an alternate flop line. The big blind checks. If the big blind checks, which they do at 55% frequency, the button bets a polarized range about 46% of the time, using bet sizes between 35% and 50%. The button's betting range uses a lot of top pair holdings for value, supplemented with bluffs. After a 50% bet by the button, the big blind check raises any trapped aces, kings, and most ace-queen. If the big blind calls the flop and the turn is the 10 of diamonds, the big blind constructs a donk shoving range, 152% pot bet, with vulnerable strong hands like 2-pair, queen 10, 10-9, and top pair, king queen. They also use weak pairs and flush draws as bluffs. The big blind will also check raise sets of 10s and 9s all in, while queens trap and protect the remaining top pairs in the calling range. All flush draws call and often donk shove on the river if improved to a flush. In this line, on a river card like the 3 of spades, completing the spade flush, most flushes shove using missed diamonds as bluffs. A set of queens check calls the all-in with 62% equity. There's a notable frequency of checkbacks with top pair holdings by the button, indicating a cautious approach to potential traps or stronger hands in the big blind's range. In this comprehensive analysis, we've explored the intricate interplay between the big blind and the button in 3 bet pots. We looked at the pre-flop ranges, then moved on to examine the post-flop strategy for all 1755 flops. Then we discussed 3 different flops in detail. These examples highlighted the complexities of post-flop play and the importance of range considerations, bet sizing, and board textures.